The first sign that something was wrong came not from Earth, but from the silence of the stars. Space had never been quiet. Between the endless chatter of convoys, the traffic of merchant fleets, the clipped military codes of border patrols, and even the strange ambient hum of alien civilizations broadcasting culture into the void, the galaxy was a symphony of noise. Ships pinged each other for docking rights, stations traded weather updates, and whole planets sometimes bled music into the void just because they could. Silence was unthinkable. But then, one by one, the voices dimmed. Captain Elara Vance noticed it first when the routine daily update from the Valorian trade hubs failed to arrive. It wasn't unusual for a relay to glitch, space was vast, and equipment broke. But then the Ocean banking servers stopped responding. The Kesri language academies, which flooded subspace with lectures 26 hours a day, vanished mid-sentence. Entire constellations of communication nodes simply went dark. At first, the crew of the Stalwart Dawn joked about it. Maybe the Valorians finally learned to shut up, her chief engineer Mason said with a laugh. That'd be a galaxy first. The laughter was easy, nervous, like soldiers before a battle they weren't sure would ever arrive. Elara wasn't laughing. She had been in the Galactic Navy for 20 years, and silence wasn't the galaxy's natural state. Silence was death. By the time the Stalwart Dawn reached the edge of the Pharaon expanse, half the known civilizations had gone silent. The other half whispered rumors, fleets vanishing, colonies reporting strange atmospheric disturbances before going dark, mysterious flashes on long-range sensors. No one had answers. No one had time to make sense of it. And then, the Council stopped broadcasting too. That was when humanity knew it was alone. The United Earth Directorate was not the strongest power in the galaxy. Not the richest. Not even the most populous. But humans were stubborn, curious, and uncomfortably loud. They had spread farther than most, seeding colonies in star systems others had ignored, building stations where more cautious species saw only barren rock. They made noise, and when noise went quiet, humanity kept shouting. On board the Stalwart Dawn, Elara assembled her crew in the briefing room. The air was tense, the usual hum of chatter absent. Mason lounged in his chair, chewing on a protein stick like the end of the world wasn't crawling toward them. Lieutenant Rena Soul, her navigation officer, sat ramrod straight, her silver eyes flicking nervously from one crewmate to the next. Doc Harris, the medic, tapped his stylus against a datapad with a rhythm too sharp, too fast. Elara let the silence build. She wanted them to feel it, the way she did, a silence so deep it pressed against the eardrums, demanding to be filled. "Half the galaxy is gone," she said finally, her voice steady. "And no one knows why. The Council isn't responding. The Valorians, the Ishans, the Kesri, all dark. Every hour, more colonies stop transmitting. Whatever this is, it's spreading fast." Mason snorted. "So what? Maybe they're just hiding. Batten down the hatches, wait for the storm to pass." "Civilizations don't just hide," Elara shot back. "The Council doesn't hide. You've seen the reports. Fleets vanish, stations lose all life signs in seconds. This isn't a storm. It's a purge." The word hung there. None of them wanted to believe it. Doc Harris cleared his throat. "Captain, if that's true, why are we still talking? Why is Earth still intact?" That question had haunted Elara since the first silence fell. Humanity should have been hit already. They were noisy, arrogant, always stepping on someone's tail. If something was wiping civilizations clean, Earth should have been one of the first. But for reasons she didn't understand, humanity was spared. Rena finally spoke, her voice tight. "Or maybe we're next." The room went cold. Elara leaned forward, her hands flat against the table. "Then we prepare. If the galaxy has gone dark, humanity doesn't get the luxury of waiting. We don't hide. We don't hope. We fight." "Fight what?" Mason asked, eyebrows raised. Elara's lips thinned. "Whatever's out there." For the next week, the Stalwart Dawn became a fortress of desperation. Mason rigged old mining drones into makeshift defense turrets, swearing under his breath about how jury rigging is an art, not a crime. Rena recalibrated navigation to run predictive jumps, so they could slip out of ambush zones before they were trapped. Doc Harris stockpiled medical supplies, grumbling about how half of them were expired, the other half unreliable. And Alara? She listened. She sat for hours in the comms chamber, headphones pressed against her ears, straining for the faintest signal in the dark. Most of the galaxy was silent, but not all. Sometimes she caught whispers. A burst of Valorian song, cut off by static. A Kesri distress beacon, repeating the same broken phrase, "They are here, they are," before it dissolved into nothing. A human colony on Titan's Reach, screaming for help, before the signal collapsed into silence. Every time she heard one, Alara felt the weight of command settle heavier on her shoulders. And then came the strangest signal yet. It was not words, not music, not distress. It was a rhythm. 3 sharp bursts, then a pause. 3 more. Over and over, faint but deliberate. Morse code. Alara's heart stuttered. Morse code was ancient, obsolete, discarded centuries ago. But it was human. Undeniably human. "Mason!" she barked. "Boost the gain. I want that signal clear." Static roared in their ears, but the pattern persisted. 3 bursts. Pause. 3 bursts. SOS. A human call for help, echoing in a galaxy that had gone silent. The crew exchanged glances. For the first time in weeks, there was no fear in their eyes. Just purpose. "Captain," Rena said, her voice trembling with something like hope. "They're still out there." Alara nodded slowly. "Then we're going to find them." The signal led them to the dead zone. The Ferran expanse had always been a graveyard, thick with ion storms and electromagnetic interference, the kind of place navigators avoided unless they had a death wish. Now it was worse. The stars themselves seemed dimmer here, their light swallowed by an unseen veil. Ships that entered rarely returned, and those that did brought back stories of shadows moving in the dark, of fleets swallowed whole. The SOS pulsed from the heart of it. "You're insane," Mason muttered as they approached the storm wall. "We follow that signal, we're not coming back." Alara gripped the arm of her chair. "Better to burn with purpose than rot in silence." The stalwart Dawn plunged into the storm. Immediately, the ship groaned under the assault of static and radiation. Alarms blared, lights flickered, the hull rattled like a drum. Rena's hands flew across the console, guiding them through the turbulence with precision that bordered on artistry. Mason cursed every 2 seconds, but his hands never stopped moving, patching systems faster than they could fail. And then, through the chaos, the crew saw it. A station. Or what was left of one. It drifted in the storm, massive and broken, its outer rings cracked and torn. Fires flickered inside its shattered hull, oxygen venting into space in glowing plumes. The SOS pulsed from deep within, steady and relentless, a heartbeat in the void. Alara felt her chest tighten. Whoever was inside had survived this long. That meant something. "Dock us," she ordered. The stalwart Dawn latched onto the broken station with a shudder. The airlock hissed. The silence deepened. Weapons drawn, the crew stepped into the dark. The corridor was a nightmare, walls scorched, bodies floating weightless, faces twisted in fear. Symbols Alara didn't recognize were carved into the metal, crude and violent, as though something had clawed at the station from the inside. But through it all, the SOS continued. 3 bursts. Pause. 3 bursts. "Captain," Rena whispered, her voice barely audible. "Something's still alive in here." Alara raised her weapon, eyes scanning the dark. "Then let's find it." The silence pressed in around them, thick and suffocating. The galaxy had fallen quiet. Civilizations had been erased. But here, in the heart of the storm, someone still spoke. And if humanity was the last voice left in the dark, Alara swore they would not go unheard. The first body floated past them like a question that had already been answered. It was Valorian, its long, translucent skin shriveled and cracked from vacuum exposure. Its six-fingered hands were frozen in a clawed grip, mouth open in a silent scream. Elara kept her weapon raised, stepping carefully as her magnetic boots clamped against the floor. Rena's breath echoed harshly in the calms, too quick, too shallow. Mason muttered under his breath, not quite prayers, not quite curses, while Doc Harris scanned the corpse with his med pad. Dead 36 hours at least, Harris whispered. Cause of death, decompression. But, he hesitated, zooming in on the deep gouges across the body. These aren't environmental. Something tore into it. The air seemed to grow heavier. Stay alert, Elara ordered, her voice hard. We're not alone here. The SOS grew louder as they pressed deeper into the station. Every hallway looked worse than the last, burned bulkheads, claw marks, blood frozen in glittering spheres drifting through the air. Sometimes, Elara thought she saw shapes moving at the edge of the shadows, but every time she turned, there was only silence. Finally, they reached the central hub. It was massive, a cathedral of metal with shattered windows that opened into the storm beyond. Fires flickered in patches, barely clinging to oxygen. At the center of the room stood a comms console, still flickering with faint blue light. And slumped against it, alive, was a man. Human. His suit was shredded, his face pale, but when he saw them, his eyes lit with wild relief. He tried to stand, stumbled, and collapsed again. Mason rushed forward and caught him under the arms, dragging him upright. You're real, the man rasped, voice broken from thirst. By the stars, you're real. Name and rank, Elara demanded, though her voice softened at the edges. Lieutenant Jonah Cade, he croaked. Earth Directorate. Station Defense. Or what's left of it. Doc Harris was already digging through his kit, injecting fluids into Jonah's arm. The man shuddered, color returning faintly to his face. His eyes darted between them, desperate, terrified. They came out of nowhere, Jonah whispered. Shadows. They moved like liquid, crawling through vents, through walls. We never stood a chance. They didn't want the station. They wanted the people. His voice cracked. He pressed his hands over his face, shaking. They harvested us. The word chilled Elara to her core. What are they? She asked. Jonah shook his head violently. I don't know. No one knows. They don't speak, they don't negotiate, they don't even kill clean. They consume. Strip everything until nothing is left. The Council tried to fight them. Entire fleets gone in hours. He grabbed Elara's arm with surprising strength, his eyes boring into hers. But for some reason, they couldn't take me. They tried. They tasted. But they couldn't. Elara exchanged a look with Harris, who frowned. Immune? He muttered. Jonah nodded shakily. And I'm not the only one. There were others. Scattered survivors. All human. They come for us, but they can't finish the job. Something in us resists. Silence fell heavy. Humanity had always been the underdog, a scrappy species holding its own against empires older and stronger. But now, as the galaxy collapsed into silence, there was a horrifying possibility. Humans were the only ones who could survive whatever was consuming the stars. Mason exhaled sharply. So we're roaches. Figures. No, Elara said, her voice low, steady. We're fire. And fire survives the dark. Before Jonah could respond, the lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the floor, deep and wrong, like the growl of something enormous. The temperature dropped sharply. Rena's voice broke the silence. Captain, we're not alone anymore. Out of the shattered windows, the storm seemed to ripple. Shapes detached from the darkness, crawling along the edges of reality itself. They weren't ships. They weren't even creatures in any form Elara could name. They were shadows, vaguely humanoid but shifting, their limbs stretching and twisting as if light itself couldn't decide what they were. One by one, they slipped through the cracks of the station walls, pouring into the hub with liquid grace. Weapons fire lit the dark. Mason's modified rifle barked blue-white bolts that tore through two shadows, scattering them like smoke in wind. Rena fired steady, precise bursts, forcing them back. Alara's sidearm burned in her hand as she dropped 3 more, but for every one that dissolved, 2 more slid out of the walls. Jonah screamed, pointing. "The console! They want the signal! They hate it!" The calm's console flickered under assault, shadows crawling toward it like moths to flame. "They want the SOS silenced," Alara realized. "Because it calls us." "Then we don't let them win!" Mason roared. He sprinted forward, tossing a plasma grenade at the console's base. The explosion ripped through the hub, incinerating shadows in a wash of fire. For a heartbeat, the hub was clear. But the console sparked, flickered, and dimmed. The SOS faltered. "No!" Jonah cried, rushing to it. His fingers flew across the dying interface, coaxing life back into it. "If this dies, every survivor out there will vanish into the dark." "Alara!" Rena shouted. Shadows were regrouping, pooling together into something larger, denser. One towering figure began to form, its body a writhing mass of limbs and faces, screaming without sound. Alara made her choice. "Mason, Rena, hold them back! Harris, cover Jonah! That signal stays alive!" The crew fought like demons. Mason fired until his rifle overheated, then used it like a club, smashing shadows apart with raw fury. Rena's precision became poetry, every bolt finding a mark, her movements calm despite the chaos. Harris dragged Jonah behind cover, patching his bleeding arm while firing blindly with his sidearm. And Alara faced the giant. It loomed above her, its shifting form blotting out the flickering lights. Its many faces turned toward her, mouths opening in a chorus of silent screams. She fired. Again. Again. The shots barely slowed it. Then it struck. The shadow's limb lashed out, smashing Alara across the chamber. Her armor absorbed some of the impact, but pain flared through her ribs. She forced herself to stand, blood in her mouth. It came again. She dove aside, the limb smashing into the floor where she had stood. Metal bent and screamed. Her weapon was useless. But Alara Vance was not. She ripped a flare from her belt and ignited it. A burst of red fire flooded the chamber, brighter than the emergency lights, brighter than the storm outside. The shadow recoiled, shrieking in silence, its form unraveling under the fire's glow. "Light hurts them," Alara shouted. "Burn them!" Mason laughed like a madman. "Then let's barbecue these bastards!" He tossed another plasma charge, flooding the room with searing light. Rena shot a fire-suppressant canister, turning it into a blinding explosion. Harris pulled a chem flare from his kit and hurled it into the swarm. The shadows writhed, shrank, dissolved. The giant shrieked as its body unraveled, until nothing remained but smoke. The hub was silent again. Only the crackle of fires, the hiss of venting gas, the labored breathing of survivors. The SOS console flickered back to life. Jonah slumped against it, triumphant. "Signals secure. Survivors will hear it." Alara leaned against the scorched wall, chest heaving. She looked at her crew, bloodied, bruised, but alive, and felt something she hadn't in weeks. Hope. The galaxy had fallen silent because the shadows demanded silence. They consumed life, voice, light. But humanity resisted. Humanity spoke with fire. Alara met Jonah's gaze. "You said there are others. Survivors." He nodded weakly. "Scattered. Hiding. Some on colonies, some drifting in dead fleets. All human. Then we find them," Alara said. Her voice was steel. "We bring them together. We give the galaxy its voice back." Mason groaned, wiping soot from his face. "Captain, you do realize you're suggesting we paint a target on humanity the size of a supernova, right?" "Good," Alara said, holstering her weapon. "Let them come." The galaxy fell silent because no one fought back. "We will. We'll make so much noise they'll wish we'd stayed quiet." The crew stared at her for a heartbeat, then, one by one, grinned. Because for the first time, silence wasn't winning. The storm outside the station hadn't lessened. If anything, it seemed angrier now, surging against the broken hull as if it wanted to reclaim what the humans had stolen. The SOS pulsed steadily, a heartbeat against the void, but Alarin knew it would not go unanswered. The shadows would come. They always came. The stalwart dawn felt cramped after the cavernous, ruined hub. The crew moved like restless animals, pacing, muttering, checking weapons. Rena ran simulations of possible interception vectors, her eyes darting between holographic models as if she could outmaneuver fate. Mason stripped down his rifle and rebuilt it for the third time, adding jury-rigged coils that sparked dangerously. Harris treated Jonah's wounds in silence, his jaw clenched tight. Alara stood at the viewport, staring into the storm. For years she had believed silence was the enemy of humanity. Now she understood, silence was the symptom. The true enemy was what moved inside it. "Captain?" Jonah's voice pulled her back. He looked stronger now, patched up and steady on his feet. "The shadows don't just want to silence us. They need to. Every voice, every light, every spark of defiance, it burns them. Humanity's the only species they can't consume. We don't just survive them. We hurt them." Mason snorted. "Yeah, great. So the entire galaxy's been eaten alive and we're the one species they can't stomach. Figures." But Alara didn't laugh. Jonah's words rang too true. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were different. And the shadows knew it. Rena looked up from her charts. "If the SOS is still broadcasting, other survivors might be on their way here. That means the shadows will strike before they arrive. They won't risk more humans gathering." Alara nodded slowly. "Then we make our stand." The silence in the room deepened. None of them argued. They all knew it was inevitable. Within hours, the stalwart dawn and the broken station were transformed. Mason wired drones into automated defense nodes, their mining lasers recalibrated to burn brighter than suns in miniature. Rena overclocked the navigation AI to predict shadow movement, though it strained the ship's systems to the breaking point. Harris stockpiled every flare, plasma charge, and chemstick he could find. Even Jonah, still weak, worked at the console, amplifying the SOS until it shook the air with every pulse. Every action carried an unspoken truth. They were preparing to die. But Alara refused to believe death was the only outcome. Humanity had been underestimated before, by empires, predators, tyrants. Every time, they endured. This time would be no different. The storm began to move. At first, it was subtle. Shadows pulling at the edges of sensors, distortions in the light, whispers of something vast shifting in the void. Then came the sound, a low, grinding hum, as though the universe itself was protesting what was about to happen. "They're here," Rena whispered. The first wave struck without warning. Dozens of shadows poured through the storm wall, sliding across reality like liquid knives. Defense drones shrieked to life, spraying beams of blinding light that cut swaths through the darkness. The shadows recoiled, their forms unraveling under the assault. But more kept coming. Always more. "Targets on the port side!" Mason bellowed, firing his rifle through the viewport slits. His shots flared like miniature suns, ripping shadows apart. "Starboard too!" Rena snapped, rerouting power to the outer shields. "They're trying to flank us!" Ilara barked orders, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line! Make them bleed for every meter!" The station trembled as shadows slammed against the hull. Corridors twisted with their presence, metal groaning under the assault. The crew moved as one, fighting, burning, forcing the silence back. Then the giant came. Bigger than before, its form stretched across the void like a nightmare. Faces screamed silently from its surface, thousands of them, Valorian, Kesri, Ishin, all the species that had fallen before. Their eyes glowed with hollow light, their mouths frozen in eternal despair. It struck the station like a hammer. Entire sections crumpled. Fires erupted. The SOS console flickered. "Ilara!" Jonah shouted, wrestling with the controls. If it destroys the console, the signal dies. She didn't hesitate. Mason, Harris, hold the hub. Rena, with me. They sprinted to the outer hull, magnetic boots slamming against the metal. The storm clawed at them, lightning flashing, radiation gnawing at their shields. The giant loomed ahead, its mass blotting out the stars. How the hell do we fight that? Rena yelled, her voice nearly lost in the storm. Alara's answer was simple. With fire. They launched flares into the void, streaks of blazing red and orange against the storm. The giant recoiled, its form unraveling where the light struck, but it did not stop. It bellowed soundlessly, striking again. The shockwave ripped Rena from her footing, hurling her into open space. Rena! Alara cried. The navigator spun wildly, seconds from vanishing into the storm. Alara didn't think, she leapt, firing her grapple line. It caught Rena's suit, yanking her back toward the hull. The impact nearly tore Alara's shoulder from its socket, but she gritted her teeth and pulled her officer back to safety. Rena gasped, eyes wide. You should have let me go. Not my style, Alara snapped. Get back on your feet. Together, they turned back to the giant. It was tearing the station apart piece by piece. Every strike dimmed the SOS. Every second brought humanity closer to silence. Alara! Mason's voice crackled in her calm. We can't hold them much longer. Shadows everywhere. Jonah's voice cut in, desperate. The console's failing. We need more power or the signal dies. Alara stared at the giant, at the console flickering, at the storm closing in. There was only one choice. Rena, you're in command if I don't make it. Rena's eyes widened. What are you? But Alara was already moving. She sprinted across the hull, flares blazing from her belt, plasma grenades clutched in her hands. The giant loomed before her, its shifting faces shrieking silently. She didn't slow. Come on, you bastards, she growled. If you want humanity quiet, you'll have to silence me first. She hurled grenades into its core. Light erupted, brighter than a sun, tearing its form apart. The giant screamed, shadows unraveling. But it wasn't enough. It began to reform, pulling itself back together. Alara dove into its center. The storm swallowed her. Darkness pressed in from every side, cold and suffocating. Faces surrounded her, whispering, begging. She felt them clawing at her mind, at her soul, trying to silence her too. But she was human. And humans burned. With her last strength, she ignited every flare, every charge, every spark she carried. Fire roared outward, light tearing through the dark. The giant convulsed, its body splitting, shattering, screaming as it dissolved into ash. On the station, the SOS blazed brighter than ever, pulsing with renewed strength. Survivors across the void would see it. They would hear it. Rena's voice cracked over comms, raw with grief and awe. She did it, she destroyed it. Mason's laughter was wild, disbelieving. The captain lit herself up like a bloody star. Shadows didn't stand a chance. The storm recoiled, thinning, breaking. For the first time in weeks, light pierced through, stars shining clear. But Alara was gone. Or so they thought. A weak signal crackled through the comms. Stalwart Dawn, report. Captain? Rena gasped. Alara's voice was faint, ragged, but alive. Don't count me out yet. I'm not that easy to silence. The crew erupted in cheers, relief flooding through them. Humanity had not only survived the storm, they had won a battle the galaxy thought impossible. But as the SOS pulsed brighter, a truth settled heavy on them all. The shadows would come again. Stronger. Angrier. And humanity would be waiting. The storm retreated, but the silence lingered. For the first time since the galaxy had begun to go dark, stars shone clearly in the Pharan expanse. The shadows had been driven back, torn apart by fire and light, but no one believed they were gone. The storm was only parting, not ending. The crew of the Stalwart Dawn knew this. Every survivor who heard the SOS knew this. But for now, humanity still spoke. Elara's return had been nothing short of a miracle. When her voice cut through the static, half the crew cried, the other half laughed like lunatics. Harris kept swearing under his breath as he patched her up, muttering things about medical miracles and stubborn lunatics who should be dead. Elara bore the bruises, burns, and fractures with quiet determination. Pain meant nothing compared to the fact she was breathing. "You jumped into a star-eating monster," Mason said as he rewired a fried console, "and then set yourself on fire inside it. Captain, I mean this in the nicest way possible, you're completely out of your mind." Elara gave him a thin smile. "Maybe. But it worked." And it had. The giant shadow was gone. The SOS was brighter than ever, its call echoing across the void. Survivors would come. Humanity would gather. That much, Elara clung to with steel determination. Within a day, the first response arrived. It was a battered civilian freighter, hull scorched, engines sputtering. The ship wobbled toward the station like a wounded animal, guided by the beacon. Inside were 70 survivors, humans, every one of them. The crew of the stalwart Dawn worked tirelessly to stabilize them, giving food, water, light. The newcomers carried stories, colonies burned to ash, fleets dissolved into silence, friends and family swallowed by shadows. But each story ended the same way: they had survived where others had not. "Every time the shadows tried to take us, they couldn't," one survivor said, her voice trembling. "They clawed at us, screamed in our heads, but something inside us pushed them out. We don't know why. We're still here." Others arrived soon after. Shuttles. Mining rigs. Even escape pods barely held together by tape and prayer. All drawn by the SOS, all filled with human survivors who had seen the galaxy fall and refused to fall with it. Within a week, the broken station became something new. A haven. A beacon. Humanity's first stronghold in the silence. They named it Torch. Elara stood in the central hub, rebuilt, fortified, glowing with lights so bright they drove the shadows back at every attempt to return. The walls still bore scars of claw marks and fire, but now they were overlaid with human banners, crude paintings, even graffiti scrawled by children. One message painted across the main bulkhead made her smile despite everything. "If silence is death, then we scream." Rena approached, datapad in hand. "Captain, we've confirmed over 300 survivors. More on the way. We've got enough supplies for now, but long-term, we'll need proper trade, agriculture, defense grids. Torch can't hold without it." Elara nodded. "Then we'll build it. Brick by brick, light by light." Mason snorted from where he was installing a new coil array. "You do realize we're building a neon bullseye in the middle of the galaxy, right? Every shadow out there's gonna come running the second they see this thing shine." "That's the point," Elara said simply. The room went quiet. Survivors nearby stopped what they were doing to look at her. She met their gazes, one by one. "They took the galaxy because no one fought back," she said. "Everyone went silent. Hid. Hoped. We don't. Humanity's loud. We survive by screaming into the dark and daring it to scream back. If the shadows want silence, we'll give them fire instead." The words spread like wildfire. Survivors whispered them, repeated them, painted them on walls. Humanity's fire was no longer just metaphor, it was their banner. And then, the shadows came again. The second assault was worse than the first. Dozens of lesser shadows swarmed Torch, twisting against the hull, clawing at the light. But this time, humanity was ready. Mason's drones blanketed the skies with searing beams, their makeshift coils calibrated to flare like miniature suns. Rena guided ships into formation, turning ragged freighters and mining rigs into a fleet of fire. Harris coordinated medics with the precision of a general, keeping panic at bay even as casualties mounted. Survivors fought side by side, every flare, every plasma burst pushing back the silence. And at the heart of it all, Elara stood on the bridge of the stalwart Dawn, voice steady, commands sharp, fire burning in her eyes. "Light them up!" she roared. Torch burned brighter than a star. The shadows howled soundlessly, writhing, unraveling under the onslaught. For every shadow that slipped through, a human stood ready with fire in their hand, fury in their voice. They were not prey. They were not victims. They were humanity, and they would not be silent. The battle raged for hours. Hulls cracked, systems failed, men and women fell, but still they burned. When the last shadow dissolved, when the storm finally recoiled, Torch still stood. Scorched. Broken in places. But shining. The survivors cheered, voices raw but fierce. For the first time, they had not merely survived. They had won. That night, or what passed for night in the endless void, Elara walked the rebuilt hub. Children laughed as they scrawled new graffiti on the walls, voices loud and unafraid. Adults shared food, stories, and plans. No one whispered. No one dared stay quiet. Jonah approached her, his face drawn but determined. You realize what this means, don't you? Humanity's not just surviving. We're fighting back. We're the last fire left in the galaxy. Elara looked at the glowing console, the endless pulse of the SOS. A beacon that no longer meant distress, but defiance. Then we make it count, she said. The next weeks blurred into work. Torch grew, docking bays expanded, defenses reinforced, survivors trained. Humanity was gathering, not just in numbers, but in spirit. They weren't waiting for the shadows to come again. They were preparing to take the fire into the dark themselves. And yet, in the quiet moments, Elara stood at the viewport, staring at the stars. She wondered about the others, the Valorians, the Ishans, the Kesri. Entire civilizations swallowed, voices silenced forever. A galaxy of cultures, histories, laughter, all gone. Could humanity really stand alone against such endless dark? Her doubt was shattered when a child pressed something into her hand. It was a crude drawing, scrawled in bright colors on scavenged paper. It showed a stick figure holding a torch, standing tall while black shapes cowered around it. Beneath it the words, "Thank you for keeping the fire." Elara closed her eyes, swallowing the lump in her throat. Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not while humanity looked to her for flame. When the next council, what remained of it, finally reached out, Torch was already legend. Survivors from a dozen human colonies had rallied there. Ragged fleets bore its mark. Songs spread across space, defiantly loud, mocking silence. The Council's message was fractured, weak. Only a few species had survived in hidden pockets, barely clinging on. Their envoys begged for guidance, for protection, for a spark of what humanity had. Elara answered them simply. If you want to live, make noise. Build fire. The shadows thrive on silence. So scream. Burn. Refuse to die quietly. Humanity will lead, but you must stand with us. Together, we'll light the dark. Her words became a promise. Not just to the Council. Not just to survivors. But to the galaxy itself. And so, the war began. Not a war of fleets and sieges like before, but a war of fire against silence. Humanity carried torches into the void, building beacons across the stars. Every flare, every light, every voice raised in defiance was a weapon. The shadows came again and again, but they could not smother fire. Elara stood at the heart of it all, scarred, weary, but unbroken. She had seen silence consume the galaxy. She had seen humanity resist it. And she knew one truth above all others. They were not meant to fade quietly into the dark. They were meant to burn. And as long as fire remained, the galaxy would never be silent again. If you enjoyed this story and want more epic HFY tales of humanity defying the odds, make sure to subscribe to the Void Narratives for weekly sci-fi adventures that remind us why humanity will never be silenced.